You're listening to the I Love You Keep Going podcast with George Haas. For more information, please visit our website at www.mettagroup.org. That's www.mettagroup.org.
So welcome, everybody. This is I Love You Keep Going. It is Thursday, September 12th, 7:35 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. And I thought that I would talk about why you would consider doing attachment repair work at this point in your life. Uh, we're always trying to do the top 5 things of this, the top 5 things of that. What are the top 5 reasons that you would consider undertaking attachment repair? But it all boils down really just to one reason, and that is old age, sickness, and death. This is a short life that we have, and why not take care of this stuff now so that it doesn't interfere with the opening of your life, so that you really can get into a process of exploring. And really, one way to look at the way that attachment disturbances impact you is that it interferes with that natural process of exploring the things that are meaningful, because it creates these barriers of fear, which actually prevent the attachment system itself from shutting down and allowing the exploration system to turn on. We probably don't notice it or think of it in that way because we don't really, without some kind of psychoeducation, understand the state of the attachment system being activated, or the state of it being deactivated and the exploration system being activated. And a lot of us who didn't really learn to explore very well when we were kids don't really have a tangible sense between pursuing the tokens of our culture's evaluations of what's important, the gathering of time, energy, and resources from the things that really are moving to us, that provide for us an essential meaning. Secure people, even in somewhat challenging environments, let's say secure people with features, at least they had the experience of the caregivers being attuned to them and interested in the things that they found interesting, and also some support and encouragement to pursue those things. And in those of us who have insecure, disorganized attachment, that really wasn't so much what happened. What really happened was us as children having to attend to the needs of our caregivers so that we could survive in those rather harsh environments. And if you haven't gone through a normalizing process where you actually understand how difficult those environments were, you might just think that that's normal life, as it turns out. We talk about security and attachment as being an astonishingly low bar. And I think that insecure and disorganized people so wildly overestimate what that means. You ask a disorganized person how ordinary security is, and they'll often express somewhere along the lines of a unicorn. It's just not something that you actually ever encounter. And for disorganized people, that's largely true, because the disorganized people are so unreliable. Secure people won't really be in relationship to them. So the secure people self-exclude from entering into relationships with disorganized people. But and they probably don't do so well with insecure organized people either. Do you know enough about attachment that when I say these kinds of categorizations, you have an understanding of what I'm talking about, or do I need to go a little bit more granular on that?
More granular.
Okay. When we talk about the spectrum of attachment, we're talking about an organized group and a disorganized group. The organized group has a reliable attachment response to attachment stressors. So secure people respond in a secure way. Dismissing people respond in a different, dismissing way, and preoccupied people respond in a preoccupied way. So a secure person seeks proximity and comfort for somebody when they're emotionally dysregulated and can't regulate themselves. A dismissing person deactivates their attachment system, deactivates their emotional system, and regulates through external sources. There's a high level of addiction in dismissing people. Preoccupied people become chaotic and distressed and seek physical proximity to somebody who they find regulating. But when you get into disorganization, what really is characteristic of the fearfully preoccupied, fearfully avoidant, and then the complexly disorganized person is this tremendous fearfulness that they go into, which really shuts down any capacity to explore and almost really any capacity to regulate with other people. It's the most isolating strategies, so that you really withdraw from other people to attempt to regulate. And complexly disorganized people can react all over the spectrum, a secure response, a dismissing response, a preoccupied response. But really what I want to talk about more is the exploration piece around how it presents with the different attachment strategies. Secure people are able to keep in balance the sense of secondary exploration. I like to call it the gathering of tokens from our culture and what it values, the gathering of time, energy, and resources that you need to survive and also support primary exploration, which is this pursuit of something meaningful. We often talk about it in our culture because of the way that our culture values thing as a creative expression or an artistic expression. But if you are in societies where, for instance, this is a meditation community where enlightenment was something that was highly valued, then enlightenment would actually be considered one of the things that you creatively explore. It isn't so much in the West that we think of that. So how does that happen? How do we learn to explore as children, and how does the different ways in which people experience interference with the development of that exploration, those exploration systems happen? You're a child, you're attuned to by your caregiver, you're empathetically connected, so sensitively enough. The caregiver is actually interested in your point of view and the things that you're good at, the things that you're drawn to, and they encourage you to explore them. And so you begin this process of examining the things that initially are attractive to you, evaluating whether they're meaningful or not, and then continuing down this line of discovery, more and more oriented around the things that really matter to you. This requires, of course, the activation in some sense of a self-experience. Have you ever been so concentrated on a task that the limited identity or that sense of self-consciousness is absent, and absent for a long period of time? I mean, it can be absent for hours. But then you come back into that self-consciousness and you recognize that you've been engaged in this creative activity for a long period of time, highly concentrated. That would be this activation of that sense of creative self and exploring. In a child who grows up to be a dismissing adult, we call that in attachment theory an anxious avoidant child. the way that their development of exploration is affected is that they don't have sensitively attuned caregivers. The caregivers really are not so interested in what matters to the child and the child's expression of that. They want the child to participate in a family system that's based on idealization. So the child's needs, all of those aspects of the child that would be important for the child to have developed through the interest and attention of the caregiver, doesn't really happen. What happens is that they learn a system of idealization in the home where they need to present to the caregiver a version of the experience of the child that the caregiver is interested in having. And typically causes the child to strip out all of the negative experiences, all of the frustrations at not actually being encouraged to pursue the things that matter to them, and over again present this idealized version of reality that the caregivers want. What that produces in the child is a very transactional relationship to the nature of the world. I do this performance and I get this reward. It's quite transactional. It's also lacking in really a substance quality to it because the child is actually just performing the idealization for the caregiver. It isn't based on the actual experience of the child so much. And so it doesn't have that quality of realness to it. So if you engage a dismissing adult and they give you what you want in the conversation, they promise you the sun and the stars and the moon, and you're not, and you're a secure person, for instance, you're expecting them to deliver on their promises. But for them, there was never any delivery in childhood. They never had to do any of that. That isn't what happened. And they don't have that expectation that that's what they should be doing. They're providing you with an ideal experience, which is the thing in itself. And then you provide for them what they want, and they think that the transaction is complete. Now, that tends to preclude them from being in relationship to secure people, because secure people are actually expecting you to do what you say, but dismissing people don't. But when we turn the focus back onto exploration, what that really means for the dismissing person is that authentic creative self is never valued, and so it's not really developed. And so all of the information that would come from the pursuit of exploring things that creative sense of self would have found out is not found out. So how do you know? And because the transactional nature of the appearance of the world to a dismissing person means they get very involved in the secondary exploration, gathering the time, energy, and resources that they need so that they can transact care. Dismissing people give up on any hope that somebody will be interested in them, somebody will take care of them without the transactional nature. So they just learn how to do that, so that their exploration is really limited to the gathering of these tokens of value that our culture tends to put out. And if you were lucky and what was actually meaningful to you aligned with that, then it would be a rich experience. But often you find dismissing people, or at least in the work that I do, the complaint is that they're very good at getting all of these tokens, but they don't mean anything. And so there's a kind of despair that comes in that. I'm doing all of these things, I'm doing them well, and I'm getting the rewards, but the rewards aren't meaningful. And then what do you do? And then there's a little pivot where you spend more of your time actually trying to activate that creative sense of self that is then able to pursue things that are more meaningful. Is that making sense? One of the things about the general unfairness of all things, as I like to call it, is that dismissing people have all of the skills that are necessary to really pursue primary exploration. Really, what they need to do is change their mind about the value of it and then begin the process of pursuing it. But the ability to explore is there, the ability to navigate the world is there. And often the resources that they need to do the exploration are there because they're good at secondary exploration.
George, could you talk about the value again? Why do they think that there is no value in exploring?
Well, when you're just gathering resources to transact care, it's easy to get into this understanding that if I wasn't giving you something, you wouldn't give it to me. So it's really not about me. You don't care about me. You care about the resources that I can direct to you. And so in the interpersonal relationship, there isn't the belief that you would do this for me if I wasn't giving you something. And really, when you look at the experience of the child who over and over again tries to get the caregiver to be responsive to them and never succeeds in achieving that, at the core of that is this terrible sadness that there's something fundamentally wrong with me, that nobody is interested in me or is willing to take care of me if I don't provide something for them. And so that at the core of the dismissing mind is this terrible sadness that I'm not worth anything without the stuff that I'm good at gathering. And then in response to that terrible sadness, there's this activity of trying to inflate the sense of self by gathering these tokens so that you can present yourself as valuable to draw people to you. But at the same time, you're not thinking that they're coming to this authentic experience of me, which is this terrible sadness. They're coming to this sort of facade that I'm able to create about myself. And if they discovered the core sadness of the child that was not really valued, that they would react in a rejecting way. Because the experience of dismissing people in childhood is one of constant rejection, that really becomes the expectation of the adult, that I'm constantly under threat of rejection, and I have to fortify against that. Because if I don't, I'll be knocked into the terrible sadness, which is unbearable. That making sense?
So the value is moved from the resource itself to him or herself.
The value.
All that's needed is to change the mindset, and the change of mindset is actually the change of focus from the resource itself to the
pursuit of meaning. But what happens a lot of times to people who grow up to be dismissing is that the kernel of that exploration, that kernel of what's meaningful, that the primary drive for the arising of that creative self is rejected. So it becomes this secret that's held very closely, that you don't actually ever reveal to anyone, because the experience of humiliation around it in childhood was so awful. And so you have to change your mind about being willing to express that to other people, so that you can actually bring out that very sensitive, very vulnerable primary explorations experience. Now, have to be careful about that, because you have to be sure that the person who you're going to express that to is not just going to reject you, so that you then lock it up again. And one of the things about dismissing people is they often couple with preoccupied people. And preoccupied people, while they may claim that they really want intimacy, they don't really. And so when they're faced with their partner suddenly turning around and actually opening up to allow a moment of intimacy, they're just as likely to poke you to get you to shut it down again as they are to be receptive to the experience of it. So there has to be some care in terms of that process of bringing it out into the world. But once you have the experience of that small group of people around you that really value it and are really interested in it, then you can take off with it because you have all of the skills that you need in terms of how to explore. Is that making more sense? But I've had that actually in some sense thrown back at me where I encourage somebody to do it and then they do it and the first person they pick just pokes them really hard and they just want to shut it all back down. So I try to recommend a lot of care with that. You know, when you don't normalize this stuff, that is to say, when you don't actually express this stuff to anybody and it's just something that you preserve for yourself, you don't really have a way of understanding its value in the world, right? We don't, as human beings, have much of a way of understanding ourselves without the help of people reflecting back to us their experience of what we're expressing. So when we keep that essential core of meaning private and unexpressed, we really don't have a sense of it. Really, we have our experience of it, but it isn't something that's been balanced and normalized, I like to say. You know, you grow up in a family system as a child, and that's the world. That's normal. That's how, and we don't really have the cognitive capacity to understand that the way it is in our household is not the way it is in all households. We just think that that's how the world is. And then in adolescence, when you move into the wider world, you begin to understand that not all households run the same way, and that your household has a distinct character to it. But I also think because of the way that organized and disorganized sort of separate from each other, and secure and insecure attachment strategies tend to separate from each other. It would not be unusual to be in a secure world where there wasn't much alternative to that, so that the whole world looks like that. And people function well and people are caring all the rest of it. Whereas if you're in the insecure and disorganized side of the world is really chaotic and unpredictable and fearful. Everybody's like that, and everybody's having that experience. It's even hard to imagine an alternative to that, and it's also really hard to understand how severe the circumstances are when everybody's circumstances are like that. You know, we talk about secure attachment as this astonishingly low bar, which is that 30% of the time people have to respond to your needs well enough so that you have an expectation that actually your needs will be met. And if you grow up in an insecure, disorganized attachment system, understand that less than 30% of the time your needs are actually being met, and how severe, how harsh that is for a child to have to endure, 7 attempts to get care before anything happened. But because that is the world, it's hard to normalize that. Preoccupied people, in terms of exploration, the problem is that their whole process of exploration is interfered with. This either is through overprotection or the caregiver themselves is so chaotic that the child becomes enmeshed in the mind states of the caregiver and is not free then to pursue their own interests in the world. They're in a state of having to attend to the needs of the caregiver at such a constant rate that that individuation that they would need in order to be able to pursue their own exploration, the emotional regulation that they would need in order to pursue their own exploration, just is never available to them. Often either the caregiver presents as so helpless that they take on a controlling role, or the caregiver insists that they're helpless, so that in order to get any attention really that would be useful to them, they have to pretend to be helpless in order to get attention. But because this interferes with the capacity to explore so early in that development of, or even much experience of that creative sense of self arising to be the doer of the exploration, is not present so much. On the controlling side, of course, you can have people that get very good at secondary exploration, really well, do really well at school, really see this their way out of that chaotic household. But it doesn't actually translate too much into the activation of that creative sense of self that is then the motivator for exploration. And what you see in the adult lives of organized, preoccupied people is they're very good at supporting other people's exploration, but they don't do much of their own. So in a professional environment, they support the higher ups in a way that's consuming for them. But if they were put in a position of having to come up with what it is that the company was supposed to be doing, they wouldn't really be able to do it so well. Is that making sense? Disorganized people have the experience of that natural creative sense of self often being activated and exploited, so that the perpetrators who harm them use that as a way of getting to them. In disorganization, the main qualifier is that the caregiver themselves is the source of fearfulness. So remember that the attachment system activates, which causes you to seek proximity to somebody who will protect you. But when the caregiver is the cause of the fearfulness that activates the attachment system, which would cause you to seek proximity to them, and they're the ones who are frightening, it activates the fight or flight system, which then cancels out the attachment system and leaves the child in a position where they don't seek comfort from anyone. That's one of the reasons why disorganized people self-isolate to emotionally regulate. Most of the time, the hapless nature of the caregiver, the low functioning of the caregiver, is what causes them to cross the boundaries of the child and violate them emotionally or psychologically or physically. So there's the absence of the intention and often the expression of love, and they're doing it. But for the child, the experience is that this natural desire for closeness is the thing that opened me up to the harm that I experienced. And so they distrust themselves and they distrust the desire for closeness, and really become unwilling to seek comfort from someone else because they're afraid that then is going to draw them into a situation where they'll be harmed. And because their ability to trust themselves to determine whether somebody would harm them or not is so badly damaged that they don't trust it, they really do tend to withdraw from society, withdraw from the society of other people and self-isolate. Now, there is also a trajectory on that. Childhood, really, let's say that's 0 to 10. You don't remember your early childhood, really. You don't have the physical capacity for the brain to remember it. We're very procedural, very rote as children, and then somewhere in the middle of that, 4, 5, 6, you have a sense of when that happened for you, the first autobiographical memories, unless you're strongly dismissing, and then you won't really remember anything before adolescence. And then puberty hits sort of toward the end of that period, because of all of the additives to the different kinds of foods we eat. It's quite earlier, 9, 10, 11, 12, something like that for girls, maybe a little bit later for boys. And then there's this dramatic change in your thinking process, right? You have this child's brain, which is just all of these axons waiting to connect to information. And then in adolescence, the brain is radically pruned down to the ones that are just connected, and all of the ones that aren't are pruned out, which really increases your cognitive ability to understand things. And so you can begin to reflect on your childhood experiences, and you can begin to evaluate meaning in a much higher level. And we have epistemic trust, is that you believe somebody is telling you the truth, that they have evidence to back it up. You believe that the reason they tell you it is because they want to be helpful to you. And if you recognize actually the kind of childhoods that lead to insecure and disorganized attachment, it can be shattering of the epistemic trust. And then it becomes difficult to learn from other people, and you have to do it all yourself. Disorganized people generally, their epistemic trust is quite damaged. One of the things about exploration is it's often a team sport, so you have to be able to activate these relationships in order to really dive deep into the things that you want to know. So another reason to really repair your attachment system as soon as you can is because being able to build these relationships and form these groups of people that can support you in your exploration is absolutely vital to you being able to take big enough risks to really have a rich, meaningful experience of being alive. And if you can't do that, then you often end up in a kind of despair at being alive. And that progresses as you age. Most of us are in school in our adolescence through our 20s. And we meet hundreds of people usually in that process, or at least if you're more urban, the rural environment, maybe it's the same 10 people that whole period of time. You have these opportunities to engage in all sorts of different things, and that whole expanse begins to narrow with age. And you have the attachment system that you have, which is allowing you to engage in relationships the way that you can. And if your attachment system is so adversely affected that you can't actually form attachment bonds, then what you really end up with is a succession of relationships that fail. And there's an accumulation of disappointment in that. And as soon as the disappointment gets so great that it's greater than the hope of forming a relationship, you begin to withdraw from attempting to. And that, for most people, is sort of in the middle of the 30s, where you just aren't willing to try again. It's too disruptive to things. And you begin this idea that you can have a more solitary life. but that's also going to grossly impact your ability to explore. And one of the things that you may remember in my constant jabbering on about it is that we all start as auto-regulators, and if somebody comes well enough, we reorient as an external regulator. And if somebody comes reliably enough, we learn this way of collaboratively emotionally regulating each other. Dismissing people stay in this auto-regulating state. And one of the things that happens to 20 and 30 somethings, and then later on in life, is that we mistake the engagement in meaningful activities as an expression of the pursuit of meaning, when it actually morphs into a kind of auto-regulating. And so we're simply able to distract and be with ourselves in an activity that's engaging, but that actually further isolates us and further restricts us from actually being in the world. Not that you have to be at the top of the heap, but that cycle of gathering meaning and exploring is really to go out and find the things that matter to you, and then come back to that social network that you put around yourself and expressing it and having that affect the people that are in that social circle. And if you don't develop that social circle and you never really express it, it becomes that auto-regulating, self-enclosing experience that isn't what you might tell yourself is exploration. Would it?
So that made me think, even though I was against social media, but people who are on social media, who are sharing their work, is actually much more valuable if this holds true for everybody, not just for people close to you. Simply sharing, let's say, your creative expression on Instagram and getting likes. I guess what you were saying is those interaction with people, those likes, has a lot of meaning.
I'm not saying that. An intimate, authentic expression needs to be given to a person, and you need to be able to track their response to it, which one of the things that makes social media so successful, I think, is it removes the intimacy from, and it actually removes the response, really. A like is
Or a comment.
not like somebody seeing you and understanding you and delighting in you. It's so insufficient in that way. And then, of course, do we think that life is the way that it's presented on social media? Is this an authentic expression that people are making, or is it a completely pretend experience?
So that's on the
What?
creator. That's on the creator.
Yes, indeed. But
so you're saying not a negative impact, but let's say very less influence. So let's say 20%. With the rest, 80 has to be in person.
I don't know. I don't really see much in the way of reports on what the actual impact of social media is. I do hear every now and then these complaints that it is detrimental. The only one that I've actually looked at, and it's quite old now, is that for 80% of people, there's a higher social engagement with social media because you know more of what's going on and you can show up to it in person, or you can get invites, or so event promotion and that sort of thing that leads to an actual live experience with other people. For 80% of people is better, but for 20% of people, it completely replaces any kind of interaction with other people. They use it as a way of not needing to go. And that creates social isolation, remember that we're not meant to be socially isolated. We're meant to be in physical proximity to other people. The way that the brain is, the way that the nervous system is, it actually requires a constant interaction with other people in some intimate way, not necessarily completely, but in some way where you at least have the registration that they see you and they know you. Uh, in order for the body mind to settle. And if the body mind doesn't have that, it experiences that as painful. And the longer that you socially isolate, the greater the level of pain is that you experience. I was reading something in the paper the other day that loneliness is the cause of the rise of fascism, because the inability to connect, the inability to feel connected, then creates the need for these overarching identities, which you can then identify with without having to have the intimate functionality to it. But it's also the thing that makes it so cruel and so unlimited in terms of that, because there isn't that empathetic connection to other people, that there isn't that compassionate identification with other people. So if you were using it as a resource to gather the information of where to go and what to do, that could be enhancing. But if you were using it as a replacement for that, it would not be. Is that making sense? If you have difficulty in forming relationships that are based on attachment conditioning, then doing the work of uprooting that and moving into more secure functioning relationships is going to create that foundation that then will allow you to develop exploration that provides a sense of richness and being. And then that richness, as you express it to the people that are close to you, enhances not only your experience of richness, but also their experience of richness. And then if they trust you and are willing to express the experiences of their intimate explorations, their discoveries, their sources of meaning in life, then their life is enriched in the expression of it, but also your life is enriched because you are privy to the experience of that. It may also help you with your own exploration. You do better in all things. I think that the one thing I might not have touched on in terms of a reason why to do your attachment work sooner than later is that there's a capacity in securely attached people to connect and settle, so that normal fearfulness, that normal level of anxiety that we have living in these complex social communities that we live in actually can settle. And people that don't have that capacity are in an experience of constant fearfulness, constant anxiety. And for a lot of people, it's always been there and it's so ordinary. You don't really understand the level of distress that it can be until you have the contrast of the absence of it. And then suddenly it's, oh my God, how did I get through life with this level of anxiety for so long? It's so unbearable. But what that anxiety can also do is activate the attachment system and shut down the exploration system. And so you can go for these stretches of time where there really isn't an opportunity in the way that your nervous system is operating to explore anything, because you're in that anxious, seeking safety state the whole time. Is that all making sense? I think also one of the things about the time that we live in that's so wonderful is that effective means of attachment repair haven't really been available before. This is a very new thing. Maybe not even a decade, really, I think. 5 or 6 years really since the ideal parent figure was pushed out in a book. So I think that's quite extraordinary to consider. Because before that, of course, we were just simply asked to adapt to the attachment system that we have and get along the best we could, which, you know, if you were like me, complexly disorganized, everything was hard. It was always hard. Never got not hard. Even when things went well, it was hard. There was no relief from it. We did.
George, is there any correlation between intelligence and insecurity? Would you consider, like, I don't know, CEOs or managers in successful positions to be secure? Because there's a sense that this organization comes with also poor cognition, poor intelligence. Just
No, I don't think so.
no. Then that's probably like something else. Would be ADHD would be separate, or dyslexia would be separate.
ADHD, I think, is caused by a hypervigilance in childhood because of a chaotic environment. The child has to focus on multiple things all of the time, so it is in some sense a skill. And there's even a group of people who think that it's a natural evolutionary development when we were in tribal groups, that somebody was constantly focusing on everything around, which ensured the safety of the group. Dyslexia is a kind of ordinary, natural diversity in the way that the brain is structured. The reason I think that it's considered such a problem is because our educational system isn't adapted for people who are dyslexic. And so they can't learn in that environment. So it becomes a learning disability because the dominant brain structure is the dominant system for instruction. And when you move into a system that's adapted for dyslexia, people learn. This isn't so much the issue. It's really the sort of funneling into what is considered a productive citizen doesn't adapt well to people that are outside of that spectrum that the system is built for. But I'm profoundly dyslexic, and I think the way that I think is awesome. And I think this whole instruction comes from that, where I can consider the attachment and the spiritual stuff, and I can link them together because that's the way that my brain works. And that people who are much more linear thinkers don't have a hard time making sense of these leaps that my mind just makes as a matter of its daily process of thinking. And the thing that I've learned in terms of communicating is to put the steps in so that people can follow the jumps. But I don't need the steps. My mind just jumps. Whereas people who are much more concrete thinkers and linear thinkers don't do that. They don't think that. But I love the way that my mind thinks, and I don't think it's limiting. So I think that I didn't do well in the educational system, but my mind and people who have minds like mine don't do well in the educational system because it's not the way that we think. Is that making sense?
So,
if you know, and I think as a child, if you had a sensitively attuned caregiver who realized that you didn't think literally and then helped you find the resources that you need, you wouldn't have had, like me, to go through years of not being able to function in school and being called stupid.
because we talk about like lack of imagination or visualization skills in preoccupation or in disorganization. So I cannot expect them to be like big time CEOs or like in good corporate positions or any.
Well, I work a lot in the tech, and what I notice is the very upper strategy of tech is dismissing. Uh, they're really organized around the thing. They don't have a lot of compassion. They don't have a lot of empathy. It doesn't interfere with them sort of bulldozing their way ahead. But everybody below them is preoccupied. And they're very good at supporting the vision, but they don't really have much in the way of vision of their own.
And dismissive people do.
The dismissing people see they're very good at secondary exploration, which is often why the way that the corporate world works is devastating the environment. For instance, they don't give a shit about the environment. They give a shit about getting the stuff that they want. And they don't understand the nature of the cruelty of that because they don't feel empathy. And that actually makes the corporate structure work better. They externalize all of the costs that they can. They wreck the environment and leave, and then the taxpayer has to pay for it. They don't see that as a difficulty because it's good business.
So only dismissive, not disorganized or preoccupied, will not be capable of doing intellectually high jobs or.
Well, you're associating that with an intellect of a kind, maybe.
Yeah.
If we talk about AI, which is being pieced out everywhere, right? Give it a choice of being responsible about it and going at a pace that maybe as a society we could absorb with enough protections, and losing the race, forget that. So off we go, right? The consolidation of power and resources into a smaller and smaller and smaller group of people. I read in the paper a couple of days ago that we're going to have trillionaires. But if we have trillionaires, we're going to have just masses of poor people. Does it mean that the poor people are less intelligent automatically? No, I wouldn't say that. In fact, I think it's such a lack of intelligence not to really discover and develop the talent of so many people that are talented and in favor of this shrinking segment of resource people. That seems a complete absence of intelligence to me. You know what it was? I'm paraphrasing this, but it was one of my favorites. You can't expect a woman to have an intelligent conversation if you won't allow her to be educated. Right? Does that mean that they're inherently less intelligent? It does not, in fact.
I definitely feel more intelligent as I've worked on myself for some reason. It's almost like there's a metacognition that becomes extremely sharp.
Right.
So, which I thought was very neat.
Yeah. So we've blabbed on. Why don't we do a little meditation? Some heart practices to combat the cruelty of the world. So go ahead and settle in. Okay, let go of the meditation.
They're expecting us to hold a mind state all day, right? It's a lot of effort.
It is in the beginning. So it's a jhana practice, right? So high concentration state practice. In the beginning, you effort, you place and sustain awareness, and then PT arises, or this energy arises, and then you the difference between, say, a Vipassana jhana or a Metta jhana is you don't shift to the focus on PT, which you would in a Vipassana jhana. You stay holding the mind state. And then a blissfulness arises, which actually helps it going, and then the mind settles, but it's efforting. But you do eventually drop down a notch, and then you're in second jhana, and so you don't need to effort so much. The mind just stabilizes there. We have a lot of energy in the body, a lot of bliss in the body, and then stable. But at a certain point, you'll drop into the third jhana where the energy is just too coarse, and so you go deeper in, and then it's just bliss and one pointedness, which Shinzen used to call the most pernicious trap in all of meditation because it feels so good, but you don't really get any insight out of that. You just feel good. But what we like about it is you can use it as a launching pad to go into the Vipassana practice and really explore deeply. But if you get it heats up too much, you can jump back and go into that blissful state and hold yourself there until you settle, and then go back into the Vipassana. At a certain point, though, the blissfulness will become too coarse, and the mind will slip out of metta into Vipassana, and you'll be in the fourth jhana, which is the equanimity and one pointedness, which is that balance.
Yeah, that's my effort, is to move out of this. My effort is moving out of the equanimity.
Right.
Actually.
Well, yeah, it's very easy to overshoot and end up in that equanimity, and then you need to incline the mind back into the loving kindness mind.
Which is a lot of effort. Yes, I realize this.
On the other hand, in the equanimous mind, the world is pretty ordinary. In the metta mind, the world is just beautiful.
Exactly.
So it's only worth having the skill to do it, but not get stuck there. So we started a level 2 class on Fridays, and we had the first class last week, and the second class is on the 20th, and we tend to close the registration for that after the 20th. So if you're interested in maybe jumping into it, it's on Friday mornings from 10:30 to 12:30, the first and third Fridays of the month. I have a workshop on exploration coming up, I think on the 21st, which is a Saturday. Is that right? I'm doing 2 of these exploration workshops. One is on primary and secondary exploration, and then I thought that I would talk about my own interest in photography, which is really one of my primary explorations. So the first half day long is on the 21st of September, which is from 9 until 1. And then the second one is on October 26th. So that's what's coming up. Once that class starts, pretty much all of the beginnings for the rest of the year are finished, and then we'll begin again in January. So anyway, it's on the website. Take a look. I offer the teaching freely, but I do hope that if you're resourced and are able to, you can support us. There's a donation link on the website that helps support me and also the work that Mettagroup is doing, and any amount is appreciated. Thank you for your practice. Good to see you. I hope to see you again soon. Bye.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.
Good. Glad you're here.
Yeah, me too.